I'm going to read a few of my own poems, not very many, but because I think you'd much rather hear, and I'd much rather read the translations, but I'll read a few of mine. This is a poem I wrote to my daughters when they were little. My daughters are now in their 20s. They were sort of 5, 6 when I wrote this poem, so it's quite some time ago, about 20 years ago. Good God. Anyway. This poem is called Shadows. The sun comes up, and soon the night's thin fall of snow fades from the grass, as if it could not wait to go. But look, a lank line lingers beyond the lawn's one tree, safe in its shadow still, held momentarily. Delighted, my daughter runs, twisting from my embrace, to touch the fragile snow before it leaves no trace. I've been involved with Iran now since 1970, so it's over 40 years. And I lived in Iran during the 1970s. I left during the Islamic Revolution, for obvious reasons, and I've never been back, though my wife, who is Iranian, goes back quite often. And then she comes back to the West and cries for a week at least. But she goes because she has relatives there, including her mother, who's getting very old now. But I haven't been back for a while. This poem is called Iran 20 Years Ago. I wrote it in the 1990s, when I was thinking about when I first went to Iran. Of course, Iran in the 1970s was very, very different from what it's like now. I don't want to go into all that. But this poem sort of is a way into my own 40-year now connection with Iranian culture, Persian culture. Iran 20 years ago. Each summer, working there, I'd set off for the fabled cities, Isfahan, Kashan, or Ekbatana, where Hephaestion died. The poets' towns, Shiraz and Neshapur, or sites now hardly more than villages, lapped by the desert, Nain or Ardistan. Their names now mean a dusty back street somewhere, empty and silent in the vivid sunlight, a narrow way between the high mud walls, the worn wood of the doors recessed in them, a talisman to conjure and withhold the life and lives I never touched or knew. Sometimes I'd hear a voice, a radio, but mostly there was silence and my shadow, until a turn would bring me back to people, thoroughfares, and shops. Why is it this that stays, those empty afternoons that never led to anything, but seemed their own reward, and are more vivid in my memory than mosques, bazaars, companionship, and all the myriad details of an 8-year sojourn? As if that no epiphany, precisely, were the epiphany. As Hafez has it, to know you must have gone along that way. I know they changed my life forever, but I know too that I could not tell myself, much less another, what it was I saw, or learnt, or brought back from those aimless hours. Another poem this is about Persian poetry. I've translated an awful lot of Persian poetry in my life, and my relationship to it is still rather, it's one of kind of, I might call it sort of tentative adoration. I really love this poem, but I also feel I'm trespassing with this stuff, not this poem, but the Persian poetry. It's been one of the great loves of my life. It's marvelous stuff, it's wonderful, the medieval poetry. But as I say, when I'm involved with it, I have this slight sense of being where I don't belong. And this poem talks about that. It's called To the Persian Poets. What rights have I, trespassing in your rooms, pilfering your lines, sifting your sacred dust, searching for what you were and are not now? As if I came to where Achilles flickered, drawn by the blood Odysseus spilt for him. But in another tongue, a stranger speaks, the revenant who shows me what I am, in whose hermetic words I recognize the animals and angels of my heart, my happiness, my longing, my despair. Okay, I'll read a slightly funnier poem. My stepfather had two maiden aunts who used to go around in tweeds, and they used to bicycle everywhere, and they wore sensible brown shoes, and their hair seemed to be sort of ironed into permanent shapes, this grey hair, and I found them absolutely terrifying. And then when I was 16, something happened which completely changed my view of these two maiden aunts. The maiden aunts, to this day, I don't know what their real names were. They died long ago when I was in my 20s. But we always called them Duchy and Shinks, which was clearly not their real names. And this poem is called Duchy and Shinks. It refers in the middle to the Folie. The Folie that I'm referring to is the Folie Bergère, which was a strip club in Paris in the 1920s. This poem is completely true. It's a sonnet. It's a Petrarchan sonnet, if anybody cares about these things. Which actually is vaguely appropriate. Duchy and Shinks, my father's maiden aunts, lived at the seaside and kept house together. They bicycled in every kind of weather and looked across the waves to far-off France. Routine had made their days a stately dance, a spinster's pas de deux, with every feather where it ought to be. No one asked them whether they liked a life with nothing left to chance. They showed me photographs of long ago, 2 English roses in a chorus line. I said, "They're lovely," as I sipped my tea. They were too, at the Folie, 2nd row, or downstage, glittering in a grand design, with every feather where it ought to be. The revelation that my father's maiden aunts had been strippers in Paris in the 1920s completely changed my life. Because they had seemed so proper. It was, well, anyway.